My name is Keisha Williams. I am 34 years old, and I am the head nurse of the emergency room at a major hospital in Chicago. For 7 years, I was married to Terrence, a man who the world saw as a brilliant venture capitalist, a man who wore $5,000 suits and charmed everyone he met. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive to be his wife. I thought we were partners building a life together, but I was wrong, dead wrong. While I was saving lives in the ER, my husband was plotting to end mine. For a year, I secretly helped my husband's old driver, Frank, after Terrence kicked him out on the street with absolutely nothing. Today, Frank stopped me outside a convenience store. He grabbed my arm, eyes wide with terror, and whispered, "Do not get in your car tomorrow. Take the bus. It is life or death. You will understand when you see who is on it." Then I got on. If you are just tuning in, brace yourself. This is not just a story about a cheating husband. He was the one who warned me about Terrence years ago. He told me that a man who cares more about the shine on his shoes than the dirt on his hands is not a man to be trusted. I should have listened. I looked around the small crowd of mourners. My cousins were there. My colleagues from the hospital were there. But the spot next to me was empty. My husband, the man who swore to comfort me in sickness and in health, was not there. My phone vibrated in my clutch. I pulled it out, hoping to see a message that he was parking the car, that he was running up the hill right now. Instead, I saw a text. "Emergency meeting with the board. Investors are threatening to pull out. I cannot leave. I am so sorry, babe. Bury him for me. Love you." I stared at the screen. My father was being lowered into the ground, and my husband was at a meeting. A cold knot formed in my stomach, tighter than the grief that was already strangling me. I knew Terrence's schedule. He did not have a board meeting on Tuesdays. Tuesdays were his golf days. My thumb hovered over the screen. We shared a phone plan. He was always so careful about his privacy, claiming his work was highly confidential, but he was arrogant. He often forgot the little things. I opened the Find My Friends app. I told myself I was just checking to see if maybe he was at the office downtown. Maybe he really was stuck. The blue dot on the map blinked. It was not at his office tower in the Loop. It was 10 miles away on the other side of the city, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father was 6 feet under, and my husband was at a 5-star hotel. He was not working. He was playing. But he did not know that my father left me something far more dangerous than grief, something that would turn me from a mourning daughter into his worst nightmare. The rain beat down on the black umbrella I was clutching so hard my knuckles turned white, but the coldness I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I stood at the edge of the open grave watching the mahogany casket lower into the wet earth, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly alone. Around me, I could see the side eyes and the covert glances of my aunts and cousins. They were not looking at the coffin. They were looking at the empty space beside me, the space where a husband should be standing. The whispers started low like the hum of insects before a storm, but soon they were loud enough for me to hear every stinging word. Where is he? I cannot believe he let her do this alone. Maybe he finally left her. I tried to keep my head high and focus on the pastor's words, but then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was not a comforting touch. It was sharp and demanding. I turned to see Jessica, my sister-in-law, standing there in a pristine black coat that probably cost more than my car. Jessica had never liked me. To her, I was just the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who trapped her brilliant brother in a marriage he did not need. She leaned in close, and for a second I thought she was going to offer condolences. I should have known better. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice raised just loud enough so that the entire front row could hear her. "Do not look so pathetic. You have to understand that Terrence is a busy man. He is out there crushing it in the boardroom right now, making the real money so you can keep living in that big house. We all know a nurse's salary could barely cover the electric bill, let alone the mortgage on a place like that. Be grateful he is working instead of standing here in the mud." Her words hit me like a physical slap. The air left my lungs. My cousins gasped. My aunt shook her head in pity. I stood there humiliated with my face burning. Jessica smirked, satisfied with her little performance, and stepped back into the crowd, leaving me exposed and small. I looked down at the photo of my father resting on top of the flowers. His kind eyes seemed to be staring right back at me, filled with a sadness that broke my heart all over again. I remembered the day I brought Terrence home to meet him. My dad did not care about the expensive watch or the fancy car. He looked Terrence dead in the eye, and later that night he took me aside. Keisha, he had said, his voice rough with worry. That man is not here for you. He is here for what you can do for him. He loves himself more than he will ever love you. Do not do this, baby girl. I had screamed at him. I had told him he was jealous and old-fashioned. I told him he did not understand modern love. I chose Terrence over my father's intuition. And now, as the dirt hit the lid of the casket, I realized my father was right. He had been right about everything. The shame was a heavy stone in my gut. I wanted to kneel down in the mud and beg his spirit for forgiveness. I wanted to tell him that I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Just as the ceremony was ending, my phone vibrated violently in my hand. It was a video call request. Terrence. My heart jumped. Maybe he was coming. Maybe he was in the parking lot. I stepped away from the crowd, finding a semi-private spot under a large oak tree, and accepted the call. His face filled the screen. He looked frantic. His tie was loosened, and he was pacing back and forth in what looked like a generic office hallway with white walls. "Babe," he said, breathless. "I am so sorry. This negotiation is a nightmare. They have us locked in a conference room. I tried to get away, but if I leave now, we lose everything. I am doing this for us, Keisha, for our future. I miss you so much right now." I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted so badly to believe that my husband was a hero, sacrificing his time for our family. But then he stopped talking for a second to catch his breath, and in that brief moment of silence, I heard it. He must have forgotten to mute his microphone, or maybe he was just arrogant enough to think I was stupid. In the background, there was no sound of typing, no angry voices of investors, no ringing office phones. Instead, clear as day, I heard the smooth melodic notes of a saxophone. It was live jazz, the specific kind of slow, expensive jazz they played in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton during high tea. I knew that sound because we had our anniversary dinner there 2 years ago. And then came the knife to the heart. Over the music, a woman's voice drifted through the speaker. It was close to him. Too close. "Terry, baby, come back to bed. The champagne is getting warm." The giggle that followed was light and airy and absolutely sickening. It was the sound of a woman who had no cares in the world, a woman who was definitely not in a board meeting. Terrence's eyes widened on the screen. He must have realized his mistake because he scrambled to cover the microphone, his face going pale. "I gotta go, babe. Bad connection. Love you," he stammered, and the screen went black. I stood there under the oak tree with the rain dripping off the leaves onto my neck. He did not even wait for me to say goodbye. He hung up on his grieving wife to go back to a hotel bed with another woman. The sadness that had been weighing me down for days suddenly evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard rage began to solidify in my chest. I looked back at the grave where they were finishing the burial. I looked at Jessica, who was laughing with a neighbor near her car. I looked at the phone in my hand, which was now just a black mirror reflecting my tear-streaked face. My father warned me about the wolf in sheep's clothing. I did not listen then, but I was listening now. I wiped the water from my face. I was done crying. Terrence wanted to play games. He wanted to treat me like a fool while I buried my dad. He had no idea that he just buried his own life right alongside him. I put the phone in my pocket and walked back to my car. The time for mourning was over. The time for war had just begun. The drive away from the cemetery was a blur of gray rain and red brake lights. My head was pounding with a migraine that felt like a sledgehammer hitting my temples over and over again. It was the kind of pain that starts behind the eyes and radiates down the neck, making it impossible to think straight. I needed aspirin. I needed water. I needed 5 minutes where I was not the grieving daughter or the betrayed wife, but just a human being trying to stop the physical pain. I pulled my silver SUV into the parking lot of a rundown convenience store about 3 miles from our gated community. It was not the kind of place I usually shopped at. The neon sign was flickering and the windows were barred, but I did not care. I just needed relief. I pushed open the door, and the smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner hit me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making me squint. I walked straight to the medicine aisle, grabbed a bottle of extra-strength painkillers and a bottle of water. My hands were shaking as I stood there trying to twist the cap off the water bottle right in the aisle because I could not wait another second to take the pills. That is when I saw him. At the back of the store near the clearance rack where they kept the day-old bread was a man in a heavy coat that looked 3 sizes too big for him. He was counting out nickels and dimes on top of a loaf of white bread. His hair was matted and his beard was gray and unkempt, but I would recognize that posture anywhere. Frank. My heart stopped for a second. Frank had been our driver for 5 years. He was a good man, a man who used to open the car door for me every morning and ask about my shift at the hospital. He knew my coffee order. He knew when I had a bad day and needed silence, and he knew when I needed to vent. He was loyal to a fault. And Terrence had destroyed him. Last year, Terrence accused Frank of stealing his vintage Rolex. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I found the watch 2 days later stuffed in the side pocket of Terrence's golf bag. But when I told Terrence, he just laughed and said he had already fired Frank and he was not going to look weak by hiring him back. He ruined Frank's reputation. He blacklisted him with every private car service in the city. And now looking at the man counting pennies for bread, I realized just how far Frank had fallen. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me so strong it almost knocked me over. I walked toward him, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor. "Frank," I whispered. He jumped, dropping the coins. He spun around, his eyes wide with fear. When he saw it was me, his shoulders slumped, but he did not smile. He looked terrified. "Mrs. Williams," he stammered, pulling his coat tighter around himself. "You should not be here. This is not a safe neighborhood for you." I ignored him and reached into my purse, pulling out all the cash I had. It was about $200. I tried to press it into his hand. "Frank, I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what Terrence did. Please take this." He looked at the money, and then he looked at me. For a second, I thought he was going to cry, but then his expression changed. It went from sad to urgent. He pushed my hand away, refusing the money. "I do not want your money." "Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice low and raspy, "I need you to listen to me. I need you to save yourself." Before I could ask what he meant, he grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, surprisingly strong for a man who looked so frail. He pulled me away from the open aisle and into a blind spot behind a stack of soda crates where the security camera near the ceiling could not see us. "Frank, what are you doing? You're scaring me," I said, trying to pull away. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of hunger and fear. "I saw him, Mrs. Williams. I saw Terrence. He met with a man 2 nights ago in the alley behind the old auto shop on 5th Street. I was sleeping in a cardboard box back there. They did not see me. My blood ran cold. Terrence never went to 5th Street. What are you talking about, Frank? They were talking about your car," he hissed, his eyes darting to the front door of the store to make sure no one was watching. "The silver SUV, the one you are driving right now. I heard the mechanic say the brake line is cut 80%. He said one hard stop and it snaps. He said it will look like an accident on the highway." I stared at him. The room started to spin. My husband had told me he took the car in for a safety check yesterday. He insisted I drive it to the funeral because of the rain. "Frank, are you sure?" "I am dead sure, Mrs. Williams. That is why you cannot go home tonight. If you go home, he will know you are alive. And tomorrow morning, do not get in that car. Leave it in the driveway." "Then how do I get to work?" I asked, my mind racing, trying to process the insanity of what he was saying. "Take the bus," he said. "Take the 405 Express. It stops right near your house at 7 a.m. "The bus? Why the bus?" Frank gripped my arm tighter. "Because it is life or death. Just get on the 405. Do not ask me why, just do it. You need to see who is on that bus. You need to see exactly what he's waiting for. You will understand everything once you get on that bus." Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed through the front window. A police cruiser was rolling slowly through the parking lot. Frank flinched like he had been burned. In this city, being homeless was practically a crime, and he could not afford to be arrested. "I have to go," he whispered, letting go of my arm. "Please, Mrs. Williams, trust me. Do not drive that car." He turned and bolted out the back emergency exit of the store, disappearing into the rain-soaked alley before I could say another word. The alarm on the back door chirped once and then went silent. I was left standing alone behind a stack of soda crates, clutching a bottle of painkillers and a bottle of water. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked out the window at my silver SUV sitting under the street lamp. It looked beautiful. It looked safe. It looked exactly like the kind of car a loving husband buys for his wife. But now, thanks to Frank, all I could see was a steel coffin on wheels. I walked to the counter and paid for my items, my hands trembling so bad I dropped my credit card twice. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy, but I did not care. I had a choice to make. I could believe that the old man was crazy and go home to my husband, or I could trust the man my husband destroyed and take a risk that might save my life. I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. I did not start the engine immediately. I sat there listening to the rain hit the roof. If I drove home carefully using the emergency brake if needed, I could make it. But tomorrow morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. I was going to take the 405. I was going to see what was on that bus. And God help Terrence if Frank was right. I pulled into the driveway of the house that we had bought 3 years ago. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial with white pillars and a manicured lawn that was the envy of the neighborhood. Before today, this house was my sanctuary. It was the place I rushed home to after a 12-hour shift in the ER. It was the place where we hosted barbecues and watched movies and talked about which room would be the nursery. But as I sat there in my car with the rain hammering against the roof, the house looked different. It looked like a stage set, a beautiful facade hiding something rotten underneath. I took a deep breath, gripped my purse tight, and opened the car door. I needed to be an actress now. I had to walk in there and play the role of the tired, grieving wife, not the woman who just found out her husband might be a murderer. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was not the warmth of the heater, but the smell. It was thick and suffocating. Terrence was sitting on the living room sofa with his feet up on the coffee table. He had a glass of amber liquid in his hand and his eyes were glued to the television, but he was not really watching it. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top and the sleeves were rolled up. He looked disheveled, but not in the way a man looks after a hard day of meetings. He looked like a man who had been busy doing something else entirely. I walked closer and the scent became undeniable. It was his signature cologne, Dior Sauvage, peppery and fresh, but it was layered with something else, something sickly sweet. It was the smell of warm vanilla and burnt sugar. It was the exact same scent of the perfume I had smelled on a scarf in his car 2 months ago, a scarf he claimed belonged to his sister. My stomach turned. It was the smell of betrayal. Terrence looked up at me. He did not get up to hug me. He did not ask how I was holding up after burying my father. Instead, he checked his watch and let out a heavy sigh of annoyance. "Where have you been, Keisha?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I have been waiting here for an hour. I am starving." I stopped in the middle of the room. My clothes were damp from the rain and my eyes were swollen from crying. I had just put my father in the ground and my husband was complaining about dinner. I stopped at the store. I said, my voice quiet. I needed aspirin. He rolled his eyes and took a sip of his drink. "You know, I had a hell of a day too, Keisha. Those investors were brutal. I barely got out of there alive, and I come home to an empty kitchen. Look, I know you are sad about your dad. I get it. But he is gone, okay? He is dead. The rest of us are still here, and the living still need to eat." The rage that flared up in my chest was so hot it almost blinded me. I wanted to grab the glass from his hand and smash it against the wall. I wanted to scream that I knew he was at the Ritz. I wanted to ask him how the champagne tasted while I was throwing dirt on my father's coffin. My mouth opened to let the fire out, but then Frank's voice echoed in my head. "Life or death. Do not let him know." I clamped my mouth shut. I swallowed the scream until it tasted like bile in my throat. I forced my shoulders to drop. I forced a look of apology onto my face. "You are right," I said softly. "I am sorry, Terrence. I just lost track of time." "I will make you something right now." He grunted, satisfied with my submission. Make it a steak, and do not overcook it this time. I walked into the kitchen, my legs feeling like lead. I opened the fridge and pulled out the meat. I moved like a robot. Season the steak, heat the pan, sear the meat. Every movement was mechanical because if I let myself feel anything, I would grab the steak knife and do something that would send me to prison. I listened to the sounds from the living room, the clinking of ice in his glass, the sound of him changing channels. He was so comfortable. He thought he had me completely under control. A few minutes later, I heard him stand up. "I'm going to take a shower," he called out. "The stress of today is clinging to me. Have that food ready when I get out." I waited until I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close and the pipes groan as the shower turned on. Then I moved. I turned the stove off and walked quickly back into the living room. His phone was sitting on the side table next to his empty glass. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked it up. The screen lit up. Enter passcode. I typed in 1024. Our anniversary. October 24th. Incorrect passcode. My hands started to shake. I tried his birthday. Incorrect passcode. I tried the last 4 digits of his social security number. Incorrect passcode. iPhone disabled for 1 minute. I stared at the screen. He had changed it. For 7 years, his code had been our anniversary. He had always said he had nothing to hide, but now the digital wall was up. He had locked me out. That small change was louder than any confession. He was hiding everything. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, wiping my fingerprints off the screen with my sleeve. I could not stay in that room. The smell of vanilla was making me nauseous. I walked through the kitchen and opened the door to the garage. The automatic light flickered on. There it was, my silver SUV. It was parked perfectly in the center of the garage. The paint was gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The tires looked black and shiny with fresh dressing. Terrence had made sure it looked perfect. He had told me he took it in for a full service yesterday so I would be safe. I walked around the car, slowly running my hand along the cold metal hood. It looked like a luxury vehicle. It looked like safety and comfort. But as I stared at the front wheel, remembering the terrified look in Frank's eyes, the car began to look like something else. It looked like a trap. Frank said the brake line was cut. He said one hard stop and it would snap. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the water running in the shower upstairs. My husband was washing off the scent of his mistress, preparing to come down and eat the dinner I cooked while waiting for me to get into this car tomorrow morning and die. I backed out of the garage and closed the door. My hands were trembling, but my mind was made up. I was not going to die on the highway. I was going to be on that bus, and I was going to find out exactly why my death was so important to him. The morning air was thick with a cold gray mist that seemed to seep right into my bones, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the Chicago weather. I stood in the hallway of my own home, clutching my purse so tightly, the leather strap dug into my palm. I had just told the first major lie of my marriage, and to my surprise, it had rolled off my tongue with terrifying ease. I told Terrence that the SUV would not start. I told him the engine was making a strange clicking sound and that I was scared to drive it. I watched his face closely when I said it. For a split second, I saw a flicker of annoyance, maybe even panic in his eyes, but he covered it up quickly with that smooth, practiced concern. He offered to drive me, but I insisted he stay and rest because he looked so tired from his late meeting. I told him I would just walk to the bus stop and head into the city that way. He kissed me on the cheek and told me to be safe. The irony was almost enough to make me laugh out loud. "Be safe," he said, as if he had not spent the last 48 hours engineering a way to ensure I would never be safe again. I walked out the front door and down the long driveway. I did not look back. I could feel his eyes on me, watching from the window, making sure I was actually leaving. I walked past the silver SUV sitting in the driveway. It looked so innocent, gleaming under the streetlights, but thanks to Frank, I knew it was a loaded gun waiting to go off. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the pavement, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. The walk to the bus stop was only 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Every car that passed made me jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. I felt exposed and vulnerable in a way I had not felt since I was a child. I was a woman who was used to control. I controlled the chaos in the ER. I controlled the finances of my household. I controlled my life. But walking down that street in the damp morning fog, I realized I had been in control of absolutely nothing. The bus stop was a metal and glass shelter covered in graffiti. I stood there shivering, pulling my oversized black hoodie up over my head. I had dressed down today, no scrubs, no designer coat, just jeans, sneakers, and this hoodie. I wanted to be invisible. I needed to be invisible. Frank had said take the 405. He said I would understand when I saw who was on it. I checked my watch. 6:58 a.m. The bus was due in 2 minutes. My stomach was twisting in knots. What if Frank was wrong? What if he was just a confused old man with a grudge against Terrence? What if I was standing here freezing on a street corner while my husband was at home, genuinely worrying about me? Then the bus rounded the corner. It was a hulking mass of blue and white steel groaning as it came to a halt. The brakes squealed a sound that made me flinch, thinking of my own cut brake lines. The doors hissed open. I stepped up and swiped my transit card, keeping my head down. I moved to the back of the bus, finding a seat in the corner near the rear exit. I huddled into the corner, pulling my hood down low over my forehead until only my eyes were visible. I felt like a spy in a bad movie, but the fear in my gut was very real. The bus was mostly empty, just a few construction workers and tired commuters heading into the city for the early shift. The bus lurched forward, and we began the slow drive toward the financial district. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets roll by. We passed the grocery store where I shopped every Sunday. We passed the park where Terrence and I used to run. It all looked so normal, so mundane, and yet my world was crumbling. 3 stops later, the bus pulled over near the entrance of an upscale apartment complex. This was the stop for the River North area, a place filled with high-rise condos and trendy boutiques. The doors opened, and a woman stepped on. She was impossible to miss. In a sea of gray coats and tired faces, she was a splash of vibrant, aggressive color. She was wearing a bright pink trench coat that was belted tightly at the waist, showing off a figure that was clearly maintained with hours at the gym. Her hair was a cascading wave of blonde extensions, perfectly styled even at this hour of the morning. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky and carried a designer handbag that cost more than most people on this bus made in a month. It was her, the woman from the Ritz-Carlton, the woman whose giggle I had heard over the phone. I stopped breathing. I pressed myself harder against the cold window, trying to merge with the glass. Why was she on the bus? People who looked like her did not take public transit. Then I remembered the text message I had seen on Terrence's phone months ago about car payments being missed. She was living a champagne lifestyle on a beer budget, probably funded by my husband, until the money ran out. She strutted down the aisle, ignoring everyone around her. She did not sit in the empty seats near the front. She walked all the way to the back, right across from where I was sitting. She did not look at me. To her, I was just a lump in a hoodie. A nobody. She sat down, crossed her legs, and immediately pulled out her phone. She did not put it to her ear. She held it in front of her face and tapped the speaker button. It was that specific kind of arrogance that drove me crazy, the belief that her conversation was so important that the world needed to hear it. "Hey, girl," she said, her voice loud and grating. "Yeah, I am on the bus. Can you believe it? My BMW is in the shop again." "Ugh, I know, right? It is disgusting in here. It smells like poor people." I clenched my fists inside my hoodie pockets. My nails dug into my palms. I wanted to reach across the aisle and slap the phone out of her hand, but I stayed frozen. I needed to hear this. She paused, listening to her friend on the other end. Then she laughed. It was that same high-pitched, breathless laugh I had heard at the cemetery. The sound made my blood boil. "Don't worry about it," she said, checking her nails. "This is the last time I am riding this loser cruiser. Everything changes today, literally today." I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I kept it hidden under the folds of my hoodie, but I angled the microphone toward her. I pressed record. "What do you mean today?" her friend asked on the other end. The voice was tinny, but clear enough to be picked up. Amber smirked. "I mean, the plan is finally in motion. Old man Terrence finally grew a pair. He told me this morning that the obstacle is being removed." The obstacle. I felt a wave of nausea crash over me. I was the obstacle. I was the thing standing in the way of her happiness. I was not a person to her. I was just something to be removed like a stain on a carpet. "What did he do?" her friend asked. Amber lowered her voice slightly, but she was too excited to keep it quiet. She leaned in closer to the phone, her eyes gleaming behind her sunglasses. "He messed with her car. The brakes. He said she has a long drive to the hospital today, and it is raining. He said it will be quick. One sharp turn, one missed stop sign, and boom, problem solved." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Hearing it from Frank was one thing. Hearing it from the woman who was sleeping with my husband was something else entirely. It was so cold, so casual. She was talking about my death the same way she would talk about a sale at the mall. "Oh my God, are you serious?" her friend squealed. "That is intense. Is he sure it will work?" "He is sure," Amber said confidently. "He is obsessed with me. He would do anything to get me into that house. Have you seen the pictures I sent you? It is huge. It has this ugly colonial vibe right now, but I am going to gut it." I listened in horror as she began to describe my home, my sanctuary. "I am going to rip out that awful kitchen," she continued. "The cabinets are this dated oak wood. Gross. I am going to put in all white marble and gold fixtures. And the master bedroom. God, the energy in there is so stale. I'm going to burn the mattress, obviously. I already ordered a custom California king. It is being delivered on Friday." Friday. Today was Wednesday. She had ordered a bed to be delivered to my house 2 days after my planned death. They were not just planning to kill me. They were planning to replace me before my body was even cold. "And what about the wife?" her friend asked. "What if she survives?" Amber scoffed. "She will not. And even if she does, she will be a vegetable." Terrence said the insurance payout is double if it is an accidental death. $2 million. Do you know how many shoes I can buy with $2 million? Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. I was shaking so hard I was afraid she would notice the vibration. I looked at her closely. I studied her face. And then it hit me. I knew her. This was not just some random woman Terrence met at a bar. This was Amber, the intern. 2 years ago, Terrence had brought her to his office Christmas party. She was fresh out of college, looking wide-eyed and innocent in a cheap suit. He had introduced her to me as the daughter of a potential investor. He said she was smart and eager to learn. I had been kind to her. I had bought her a drink. I had given her advice on navigating the corporate world. I had even told Terrence he should mentor her because she seemed promising. I felt sick, physically sick. I had welcomed this snake into my life. I had smiled at her while she was sizing me up, figuring out how to steal my husband and my life. She was not just a mistress. She was a predator. And Terrence was not just a cheater. He was a monster who had been grooming my replacement right under my nose. Amber laughed again. "I cannot wait to be the new Mrs. Williams. It sounds so much better on me, don't you think? The current one is so boring. She is just a nurse. She smells like antiseptic and desperation. Terrence says she is frigid. He says he has not been happy in years." I gripped the phone tighter, ensuring every word was being captured. Frigid, boring, desperation. Those were the words he used to describe the woman who paid his debts, the woman who held him when his mother died, the woman who built a life for him. "Well, you better invite me to the housewarming party," her friend said. "Oh, definitely," Amber replied. "As soon as the funeral is over and the renovations are done, we are throwing a huge bash. Champagne towers, a DJ, everything. It is going to be the party of the year." The bus began to slow down for the next stop. Amber looked out the window. "All right, I have to go. I am meeting my stylist. I need to look perfect for when Terrence calls me with the good news. Love you, bye." She hung up and shoved the phone back into her expensive bag. She stood up, smoothing out her pink coat, checking her reflection in the window. She looked satisfied. She looked happy. She looked like a woman who had won the lottery. The bus stopped and she strutted off her heels, clacking on the pavement. I watched her go through the dirty window. I watched her disappear into the crowd of morning commuters. I sat there in the back of the bus, clutching my phone, my knuckles white. The recording was saved. I had it. I had the confession. I had the motive. I had the proof. But more than that, I had a realization. The Keisha who got on this bus was a victim. She was scared. She was confused. But the Keisha sitting here now was someone else. I was no longer the boring nurse. I was no longer the frigid wife. I wiped the tears from my face. They were cold now. I pulled my hood down and looked at my reflection in the glass. My eyes were hard. My jaw was set. "You want a party, Amber?" I whispered to the empty seat in front of me. "You want to renovate my house. You want to burn my mattress." I stood up and signaled for the next stop. I had a lot of work to do. "You want a show?" I thought, stepping off the bus into the cold city air. "I will give you a show, but it will not be the one you ordered. And that $2 million you are already spending in your head, you will never see a dime of it." I walked toward the hospital, my stride long and purposeful. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating focus. I was an ER nurse. I dealt with trauma every day. I knew how to stop the bleeding. I knew how to resuscitate the dying. And I knew exactly how to cut out a cancer before it killed the patient. Terrence and Amber were the cancer, and I was the surgeon. And today, the operation was going to begin. The moment my feet hit the pavement outside the hospital, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a cold, hard determination that felt like steel in my spine. I walked into the emergency room through the staff entrance, but I did not clock in. Instead, I went straight to the break room and pulled out my phone. I needed confirmation. I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my husband was not just a cheater, but a killer. I dialed the number for Mr. Henderson. He was a mechanic who had owned a shop in our neighborhood for 30 years. He had fixed my first car when I was 16. He was honest, he was thorough, and most importantly, he had the code to my garage because he used to detail my father's cars. "Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to go to my house, right now. The garage code is still the same. I need you to look at the brake lines on my silver SUV. Do not start it. Just look." He heard the urgency in my tone and didn't ask questions. I waited on the line, pacing back and forth in the small break room, while the chaos of the ER unfolded outside the door. 10 minutes passed, then 15. My hands were sweating. Finally, he came back on the line. "Keisha, are you sitting down?" I leaned against the counter. "Tell me, Mr. Henderson." "Honey, you need to call the police. These brakes were not worn down, they were cut. Someone took a pair of wire cutters and sliced through 80% of the line. The first time you hit those brakes on the highway at 60 miles an hour, that cable would have snapped. You would have flipped that car." I closed my eyes. Hearing it was different than suspecting it. It was a physical blow. My husband, the man who promised to protect me, had rigged my car to turn into a coffin. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I whispered. "Do not touch anything. Leave it exactly how it is." I hung up. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the vending machine. I could have called the police right then. I could have had him arrested, but that was not enough. If I went to the police now, he might claim someone else broke in. He might claim he didn't know. He had expensive lawyers. He had connections. He might get away with it. No. I needed him to confess. I needed him to show his true face when he thought no one was watching. I walked out of the break room and found Dr. Evans. He was the chief of trauma surgery and one of my closest friends. We had saved hundreds of lives together. He knew my character. He knew I didn't play games. "David," I said, pulling him into a supply closet, "I need you to help me. I need you to help me stage a death." He looked at me like I had lost my mind, but when I played him the recording from the bus and told him what Mr. Henderson found, his expression changed from confusion to horror. He was a doctor. He dealt with the aftermath of violence every day. He knew exactly what a cut brake line meant. We set the stage in Trauma Room 1. It was a restricted area so no one else would wander in. I changed out of my street clothes and into a hospital gown. One of the nurses, who was good with moulage makeup from our disaster drills, painted bruises on my face and chest. We wrapped my head in bandages. We hooked me up to the cardiac monitor and set the rhythm to erratic and weak. I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles. It was terrifying how easy it was to look like a victim. The tubes, the wires, the smell of antiseptic. It all felt like a dress rehearsal for the funeral Terrence had planned for me. Dr. Evans made the call. He called Terrence's cell phone. "Mr. Williams, this is Dr. Evans from Chicago General. You need to get here immediately. Your wife has been in a catastrophic accident." I waited. I lay there with my eyes closed, focusing on my breathing, trying to keep my heart rate down so the monitor wouldn't give me away. 30 minutes later, I heard the commotion in the hallway. "Where is she? Where is my wife?" It was Terrence. His voice was loud, booming. It sounded perfect. It sounded like the voice of a distraught husband. If I didn't know better, I would have believed him. Dr. Evans led him into the room. "She is in critical condition, Mr. Williams. The car rolled over 3 times. She has severe head trauma and internal bleeding. We are doing everything we can, but I have to be honest with you. The prognosis is grim." I heard footsteps approaching the bed. I felt the air shift as he stood over me. I kept my body limp. I breathed shallowly, just enough to move my chest. Can she hear me?" Terrence asked. His voice was trembling. "It is unlikely," Dr. Evans replied. "She is in a deep coma. Her brain activity is minimal." There was a silence, a long, heavy silence. I expected him to take my hand. I expected him to stroke my hair. I expected him to whisper that he was sorry. Instead, he cleared his throat. "Doctor, I have a question. It is a difficult one, but I need to know for practical reasons. Go ahead, Mr. Williams. If she does not wake up, if she is brain dead, does that count as death legally speaking?" Dr. Evans paused. I could imagine the disgust on his face. "Why do you ask?" Well, Terrence stammered, his voice shifting from fake grief to cold calculation. "We have a life insurance policy, a significant one, $2 million. But there is a clause about accidental death versus natural causes. If she is kept alive on machines for too long, does it change the classification of the death? I just want to make sure her estate is handled correctly." My blood ran cold. I was lying there fighting for my life as far as he knew, and he was worried about the fine print on an insurance policy. He was not asking if I would feel pain. He was asking if he would get paid. It was the most heartless thing I had ever heard. "We determine the time of death based on brain function," Mr. Williams. Dr. Evans said, his voice icy. "If she is brain dead, she is dead. The insurance will pay out." I heard Terrence exhale. It was a long sigh of relief. Okay, thank you, doctor. Can I have a moment alone with her? To say goodbye." "Take all the time you need," Dr. Evans said. I heard the door click shut. We were alone. This was the moment. This was the moment the mask would fall. I felt him lean over the bed. I smelled that nauseating mix of Dior Sauvage and Amber's vanilla perfume. He did not kiss me. He did not touch me. I heard the sound of a phone unlocking, then the sound of a call connecting. "Hey, babe." His voice was different now. The fake tremble was gone. He sounded excited. He sounded like a man who just closed a big business deal. "Yeah, I am at the hospital. It worked." "Well, sort of. She didn't take the car, but she must have been distracted or walking or something because she got hit. It doesn't matter how it happened. The point is, she is done." I lay there listening to my husband tell his mistress that my death was a done deal. The doctor says she is a vegetable. Terrence continued, letting out a cruel chuckle. "Minimal brain activity. They are just keeping the meat warm at this point." I asked about the policy. "We are good. $2 million tax-free plus the house plus her dad's inheritance. We hit the jackpot, baby." He paused, listening to Amber on the other end. I know. I cannot wait either. Look, I have to play the grieving widower for a few hours. I have to call her family and put on a show. But tonight I'm coming over. Put that champagne on ice. The expensive stuff. We are celebrating." He laughed again. It was a sound I would never forget. It was the sound of pure evil. "Just do not post anything yet," he whispered. "Wait until I sign the papers to pull the plug. I want to make sure the money is secure before we go public. Okay, love you too." He hung up the phone. He stood there for another minute, humming to himself. Humming. My husband was humming a tune while standing over my dying body. "Goodbye, Keisha," he said softly. "You were a good wife. Boring, but good. Thanks for the money." He patted my leg, a patronizing, dismissive pat. Then he turned and walked out of the room. I waited until the door closed. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then I opened my eyes. I sat up in the bed and ripped the bandages off my head. I pulled the sensors off my chest. The monitor flatlined with a high-pitched whine, but I shut it off. Dr. Evans rushed back in. "Did you get it?" he asked. I reached under the pillow where I had hidden my phone. I stopped the recording. I got everything I said. My voice was raspy, not from injury, but from rage. I got the insurance fraud. I got the admission of the affair. I got the intent to kill. I looked at Dr. Evans. He looked pale. "What do you want to do, Keisha? Do you want me to call security? Do you want me to call the cops?" I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I looked at myself in the mirror. The fake bruises looked real, but the fire in my eyes was something no makeup artist could create. "No," I said, "not yet. If I call the cops now, he goes to jail for attempted murder and fraud. He gets a lawyer. He gets a plea deal. He gets out in 10 years. That is not enough." I stood up and smoothed down the hospital gown. "He wants to pull the plug," I said. "He wants to declare me dead so he can get the money." I turned to Dr. Evans. "Let him. Let him think he won. Let him plan the funeral. Let him invite his mistress. Let him try to claim that money. I am going to play dead David. I am going to stay in this hospital bed. I am going to let him dig his own grave so deep that by the time he realizes I am alive, he will be buried so far under lawsuits and criminal charges that he will never see the sun again." Dr. Evans nodded slowly. "Okay, we will move you to a private room. Restricted access, only trusted staff. We will keep up the charade." "Thank you," I said. I looked at the door where Terrence had just exited. He was probably walking out to his car right now, calling his friends, telling them the tragic news, practicing his fake tears. He was preparing the champagne. "Enjoy your drink, Terrence," I whispered, "because it is the last thing you are ever going to taste as a free man." I lay back down on the pillows. I was not a victim anymore. I was a ghost. And ghosts are the most dangerous things in the world because you never see them coming until it is too late. The hunt was on, and my husband was the prey. The room was dim and smelled of sterile cleaners and old flowers. I had been lying in that hospital bed for 24 hours, playing the role of a woman on the brink of death. My body ached from staying still, and my mind was racing, but I could not break character, not even for a second. The only person allowed in the room besides Dr. Evans was my father's personal lawyer, Mr. Arthur Banks. When the door clicked shut and I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place, I knew it was safe. "You can open your eyes, Keisha." Mr. Banks' voice was gravelly and familiar. He had been my father's friend since they were boys playing stickball in the streets of Chicago. I sat up, pulling the scratchy hospital blanket around my shoulders. Mr. Banks looked older than I remembered. He was holding a thick leather briefcase, and his expression was somber. "Mr. Banks," I said, my voice raspy. "Thank you for coming." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, sighing heavily. "Your father knew this day would come, Keisha. He did not know when, and he did not know how. But he knew that man you married was going to show his true colors eventually." I looked down at my hands. I should have listened to him. Mr. Banks opened the briefcase. "We need to talk about the will. Now, normally we would do this in my office after the funeral. But given the circumstances, Dr. Evans told me it was urgent. He pulled out a stack of documents bound in blue paper. You think your father left you the house in South Shore and his savings account right. That is what Terrence thinks too. That is what everyone thinks. Because your father drove a 10-year-old truck and wore work boots every day." I nodded. Daddy lived simple. He always said he had enough. Mr. Banks smiled a small, sad smile. "Your daddy lived simple so you could live free. Keisha, your father did not just work for the shipping company. He owned it." My jaw dropped. "What?" "Years ago, when the original owner of Blue Harbor Logistics was going bankrupt, your father stepped in. He used every dime he had saved to buy out the partners. He turned that company around. He built it into the largest freight network in the Midwest. He stayed in the background because he did not want the attention. He wanted the work. But as of Tuesday morning, when his heart stopped, you became the owner of 40% of Blue Harbor Logistics. I sat there stunned. Blue Harbor Logistics was a giant. Their trucks were on every highway in America. Terrence had applied for a job there 5 years ago as a consultant and got rejected. He had ranted for weeks about how much money that company printed. Mr. Banks continued, his voice dropping lower. The valuation of his shares is roughly $15 million. $15 million. The room spun. My father, the man who clipped coupons for groceries, was a multimillionaire, and he had never said a word. But there is a catch, Mr. Banks said, his eyes hardening. A catch that your father put in specifically for your husband. He turned the document around and pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. The protective clause. Your father called it the Terrence trap. I read the words, but my brain could barely process them. The inheritance is yours, Keisha. All of it. But only under one of two conditions. Condition 1 is that you are divorced or widowed at the time of distribution. Condition 2 is that if you are still married, your spouse must sign a full waiver disclaiming any and all rights to the assets. He has to sign away his claim to the money before a single dime is released to you. And if he does not sign, I asked, then the money sits in a trust frozen until he does, or until you divorce him. And what if I die? Mr. Banks looked me dead in the eye. That is the most important part. If you die while married to him without him signing that waiver, the entire estate, $15 million, the house, the stocks, everything goes immediately to the United Negro College Fund and St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Terrence gets nothing. Zero. Not a penny. Tears welled up in my eyes. My father had reached out from the grave to protect me. He knew. He knew that if he left me money, Terrence would try to take it. So he made sure that my death would be the most unprofitable thing that could ever happen to Terrence. If Terrence kills me, he loses $15 million, I whispered. Exactly, Mr. Banks said. He is chasing a $2 million insurance payout. But he is walking away from a $15 million fortune. Suddenly, the handle of the door jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. Mr. Banks moved with surprising speed. He shoved the papers back into his briefcase and stood up. Lie down, Keisha. Remember, you are in a coma. I flopped back onto the pillows and closed my eyes, slowing my breathing. Mr. Banks unlocked the door just as it swung open. It was Terrence. He looked sweaty and agitated. When he saw the lawyer, he froze. Mr. Banks, Terrence said, his voice tight. What are you doing here? Mr. Banks adjusted his tie, looking at Terrence with pure disdain. I came to pay my respects to my client's daughter and to verify her condition. As the executor of her father's estate, I need to know if she is capable of receiving her inheritance. Terrence's ears perked up. Inheritance? You mean the old house? Mr. Banks paused. He was a master of the poker face, among other things. It is a complicated estate, Terrence. Much larger than you realize, but we can discuss that later. Right now, she is clearly not in a position to sign anything. Mr. Banks walked past him, stopping at the door. I will be in touch, Terrence. Do not do anything rash. He left, leaving the bait hanging in the air. Terrence stood by the door. He did not come closer to me. He pulled out his phone. I heard him dialing. Pick up, pick up, pick up, he muttered. Someone answered. Yeah, it is me. Look, I need more time. I strained to hear the voice on the other end. It was loud shouting. I know I owe you 40 grand. Terrence hissed. I know the interest is piling up. Listen to me. The wife is in a coma. She is basically gone. The insurance money is coming. $2 million. I will pay you double. Just get your guys off my back. He paused, listening. What do you mean by Friday? I cannot rush the insurance company. They have to process the claim. He started pacing the room, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Okay, listen. There might be another way. Her lawyer just left. Apparently her old man had money. Real money. I do not know how much, but the guy said it was complicated. If the insurance takes too long, I can access her inheritance once she passes. I lay there, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was trapped. He owed $40,000 to loan sharks, probably for his gambling debts or bad crypto investments. He was desperate. He hung up the phone and walked over to my bed. I felt his hot breath on my face. You better die soon, Keisha, he whispered. Or you better be rich, because I am running out of options and I am not going to let them break my legs because of you. He grabbed my hand. His palm was clammy. "Just go ahead and let go, babe. Do us both a favor." He dropped my hand and stormed out of the room. I waited until the silence returned. Then I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling. My father had given me a sword. The $15 million was the weapon. But Terrence was desperate, and a desperate man is dangerous. He had two paths: kill me for the insurance or keep me alive to get the inheritance. He did not know about the clause yet. He did not know that killing me would wipe out the inheritance. And he did not know that keeping me alive would require him to sign away his rights. I had to play this perfectly. I had to make him believe that the only way to save his own skin was to wake me up. I had to make him choose the inheritance. Because once I was awake, once I was recovered, I would have the power. I smiled in the darkness. "You want the money, Terrence? You want the big payout?" I was going to dangle that $15 million in front of his face like a carrot. I was going to make him dance for it. I was going to make him beg, and when he was close enough to taste it, I was going to introduce him to the Terrence trap. My father was a genius, and I was his daughter. The game had just changed, and Terrence was already losing. For 3 days I lay in that hospital bed, existing in the space between the living and the dead. I listened to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, which was the only music in my white, sterile world. I listened to the nurses changing shift and gossiping about the tragedy of the young nurse whose husband was so devoted he barely left the waiting room. If only they knew. Terrence was not in the waiting room because he loved me. He was there like a vulture circling a carcass, waiting for the moment he could pick my bones clean. Dr. Evans had played his part perfectly, keeping Terrence away by claiming I was highly unstable. But on the morning of the third day, we decided it was time for the resurrection. I heard the heavy footsteps approaching the door. I knew that walk. It used to be the sound of safety coming home, but now it sounded like a threat. I signaled Dr. Evans with a small movement of my hand. He nodded and stepped out into the hallway. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice grave, "there has been a change. You should go in." I heard Terrence inhale sharply. He probably thought this was it. He probably thought I had finally flatlined and he was about to cash that insurance check. He pushed the door open with an eagerness that made my stomach turn. I lay there with my eyes closed, counting to 3 in my head. 1, 2, 3. I let my eyelids flutter open slowly. I let out a low, pained groan. I focused my gaze on him, making sure to look confused and disoriented. "Terrence," I whispered. My voice was weak, dry from disuse. He froze at the foot of the bed. His jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost, and in a way he had. "Keisha," he stammered, You are awake." He did not sound happy. He sounded horrified. He sounded like a man whose winning lottery ticket had just been snatched away by the wind. I reached a trembling hand toward him. "Where am I? What happened?" "What hath I?" My head hurt so bad. He took a step closer, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way out. "You were in an accident, babe," he said cautiously. "A bad one. The doctor said, he said you might never wake up." I squeezed my eyes shut, letting a single tear roll down my cheek. I do not remember. I do not remember anything. Did I crash the car? I saw the tension leave his shoulders instantly. That was what he was afraid of. He was afraid I remembered the brakes failing. He was afraid I remembered the terror of the pedal hitting the floor. By claiming amnesia, I gave him a false sense of security. I handed him the knife back so he could stab me later. "It is okay," he said finally, coming to the side of the bed and taking my hand. "It was just an accident. The roads were slick. Do not worry about it. The important thing is, you are alive." He said the words, but his eyes were dead. He was already calculating how much my survival was going to cost him. He was probably thinking about the $2 million vanishing into thin air. He squeezed my hand a little too hard. "I have to go tell the doctor," he said, pulling away. "No, Terrence, wait." I grabbed his wrist. This was the pivot point. I had to hook him. I had to make him want me alive, more than he wanted me dead. "Mr. Banks was here," I said softly. Terrence stopped. He turned back slowly. "The lawyer." "Yes. He came while I was..." Sleeping, I think. It is all fuzzy. But he told me something, Terrence. He told me about Daddy's money. I saw the spark in his eyes. It was not love. It was greed. Pure, unadulterated greed. What about the money, Keisha, he asked, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. He said it is a lot, I whispered. He said Daddy owned a huge part of that shipping company. Millions, Terrence. He said it is over $15 million. I watched him do the math in his head. $2 million from insurance versus $15 million from inheritance. It was not even a contest. His entire posture changed. He stood taller. He leaned in closer. $15 million, he repeated, licking his lips. That is a blessing, babe. Your dad really looked out for us. I nodded, closing my eyes again, feigning exhaustion. It is too much, I mumbled. I cannot deal with it, Terrence. My brain feels like it is on fire. Mr. Banks left all these papers. He wants me to sign things. He wants me to manage trusts. I cannot do it. I opened my eyes and looked at him with the most pathetic, trusting expression I could muster. You have to help me, Terrence. You are the businessman. You know about money. Can you just handle it? Can you talk to Mr. Banks and get everything sorted out so we can get the money? I just want to rest. The trap snapped shut. I saw it happen. I saw the moment he decided that keeping me alive was his new full-time job. Of course, baby, he said, smoothing my hair back. His touch was gentle now, possessive. I will take care of everything. You do not have to worry about a single dime. I will call Mr. Banks first thing in the morning. My phone on the bedside table buzzed. It was hidden under a magazine, but we both heard it. It was probably a notification, but in that moment I decided to use it. Terrence checked his own pocket. I have to make a call, he said. Work stuff. I will be right back. He stepped into the hallway, but he did not close the door all the way. I strained my ears. I knew exactly who he was calling. Amber, listen to me. No, do not yell. Change of plans. She woke up. I heard the faint sound of screeching on the other end. Amber was not happy. Shut up and listen, he hissed. It is better this way. Her old man left her $15 million. Do you hear me? 15. That is private island money, Amber, but I have to be here. I have to play the role. If I leave now, if I divorce her now, I get nothing. He paused, listening. I know I promised you tonight, but I am canceling. I'm staying at the hospital. I am going to be the best damn husband on the planet until that money is in our account. Put the champagne away. We are playing the long game now. He hung up and walked back into the room. He had a smile plastered on his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything is good, he said. I cleared my schedule. I am not going anywhere, Keisha. I am sleeping right here in this chair tonight. I am not leaving your side. Thank you, baby, I said, closing my eyes. I knew I could count on you. Night fell heavy and quiet over the hospital. The only light came from the machines and the street lamps outside. Terrence was asleep in the recliner next to my bed. He was snoring softly, his mouth open. His suit jacket was draped over the back of the chair, and his phone was resting on the armrest just inches from his hand. I waited until 3 a.m., the witching hour. I sat up slowly, wincing as my stiff joints popped. I moved like a shadow. I reached out and gently, very gently picked up his phone. It was locked, of course, but Terrence was a heavy sleeper, especially after a day of high stress and disappointment. I slid out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I knelt beside his chair. This was the dangerous part. If he woke up now, if he saw me kneeling there holding his phone, the game would be over. I took his right hand, his thumb. I pressed it gently against the sensor. Click. The screen unlocked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I worked fast. My fingers flew across the screen. I did not just look at his texts. I needed permanent access. I opened the browser and downloaded a spy software I had purchased days ago under a fake name. It was an app designed for parents to monitor their children, but it worked perfectly for wives monitoring rats. I installed it deep in the system folder, hiding the icon so he would never see it. I synced it to my cloud account. GPS tracking. Call logs, text messages, audio recording, keylogger. Everything he did, everything he said, every dirty little secret he typed would now be sent directly to me. I scrolled through his recent texts with Amber just to be sure. Amber, I hate you. I bought a new dress. Terrence, stop whining. 15 million. Keep your eyes on the prize. Once I get power of attorney, we will dump her in a facility and take a trip to Bali. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Bali. He was planning a vacation while I was planning his funeral. I deleted the browser history. I wiped the screen on my hospital gown to remove my prints. I placed the phone back on the armrest exactly how I found it. I crawled back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. I looked at him sleeping there, so peaceful, so ignorant. He thought I was his ATM. He thought I was his golden goose. He had no idea that he was now wearing an invisible collar, and I held the leash. Sleep tight, Terrence, I thought, staring at his slack face. Because when you wake up, you belong to me. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I spent the dark hours of the morning reviewing the report from the private investigator I had hired using an old emergency credit card my father had given me years ago. His name was Vance, and he was expensive, but he was worth every penny. The folder he handed me was thick with photos of Terrence and Amber entering hotels, eating at restaurants, and arguing in parking lots. It was enough to get a divorce, but it was not enough to put Terrence behind bars for life. I needed something more. I needed proof of the conspiracy. I needed to catch them in the act of planning to steal my inheritance. I knew that Terrence was greedy, but I also knew he was cautious. He would not put anything in writing unless he felt safe. So I decided to create the safest environment possible. I decided to bring the enemy right into my living room. I told Terrence that I wanted to host a small, intimate dinner party. I told him that I was feeling so grateful to be alive, and I wanted to thank the people who had supported us. I told him to invite his sister-in-law, Jessica, and I told him to invite his business associate, the one who was helping him with the portfolio. When I said the words business associate, I watched his face carefully. He blinked twice. You mean Amber? He asked, trying to sound casual. Yes, Amber, I said, smiling sweetly. She sent such lovely flowers to the hospital. I really want to thank her in person. Plus, if she is helping you with the accounts, she should know that we are going to be solvent again very soon. That was the hook. Solvent. He heard money. He agreed immediately. He probably thought it was a brilliant stroke of luck. He could have his wife and his mistress in the same room, and he would feel like the king of the world. He had no idea he was walking into an execution chamber. The night of the dinner, I spent 3 hours cooking. I made a roast beef with red wine reduction. I set the table with my grandmother's fine china. I lit candles. I wanted everything to look perfect. I wanted the house to look like a prize. Jessica arrived first. She walked in looking around with a critical eye, running her finger along the entryway table, checking for dust. Well, she said, handing me a cheap bottle of wine. You look surprisingly well for someone who was at death's door 3 days ago. I took the bottle and forced a smile. I have a strong constitution, Jessica, she scoffed. You have luck, Keisha. Dumb luck. Most people do not walk away from a car wreck without a scratch. But then again, you always were the type to survive things you have no business surviving. I ignored her and led her to the living room. Terrence was already there, pouring drinks, his leg bouncing nervously. He knew this was risky. He knew Amber was a loose cannon. Then the doorbell rang. I will get it, I said. I opened the door, and there she was. Amber. She was wearing a white dress, a tight white cocktail dress that was completely inappropriate for a casual family dinner. It was a statement. She was wearing the color of a bride in my house. Hi, Mrs. Williams, she said, flashing a dazzling white smile. So good to see you up and about. Terrence told me it was touch and go for a while. Please call me Keisha, I said, stepping aside to let her in. And thank you for coming. I watched her walk past me. She did not bring wine. She did not bring a gift. She just brought her audacity. She walked straight into the living room and greeted Terrence with a handshake that lingered just a few seconds too long. We sat down to dinner. The atmosphere was thick with tension. I sat at the head of the table. Terrence sat to my right. Amber sat to my left, directly across from him. Jessica sat at the other end. I watched them. I watched the way Amber looked at him over the rim of her wine glass. I watched the way Terrence shifted in his chair, trying to avoid eye contact with me while playing footsie with her under the table. I knew they were touching because the tablecloth moved every time Amber smirked, so Jessica said, stabbing a piece of potato. "Terrence tells me you came into some money, Keisha." I took a sip of water. "Yes, my father left a significant estate. It is a lot to process." Amber leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "How significant?" she asked. "I mean strictly from a business perspective. Terrence mentioned it involves complex assets." I looked her dead in the eye. "It is very significant, Amber. We are talking about generational wealth, the kind of money that changes everything. My father owned 40% of Blue Harbor Logistics." I heard her intake of breath. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. "Wow," she whispered. "That is impressive." "And tiring," I added, letting my shoulders slump. "The paperwork is endless." "Actually, Terrence, I was looking at the deeds today. The land deeds for the commercial properties in the Loop. I put them in the safe upstairs, but I'm so brain-fogged I think I might have left it unlocked." I saw Terrence's eyes widen. "You left the wall safe open?" he asked. "I think so. I was just so tired. I was going to lock it later." I saw the look that passed between Terrence and Amber. It was a look of pure hunger. The safe was open. The proof of the fortune was sitting right there. The dinner continued. Jessica kept making snide remarks about how I didn't deserve the money because I didn't know how to invest it. Amber kept drinking the expensive red wine I had poured for her. She was getting confident. She was getting sloppy. At one point, she laughed at a joke Terrence made and put her hand on his arm right in front of me. "Oh, Terrence, you are so funny," she giggled. I gripped my fork. That was it. That was the moment. I stood up to clear the plates. As I reached across Amber to grab the salad bowl, I tipped my hand. It was a small movement, calculated and precise. The half-full glass of dark red wine tipped over. The liquid splashed across the front of her pristine white dress. Amber shrieked, jumping up. "Oh my God, my dress! This is silk!" I gasped, putting my hands to my mouth. "Oh, Amber, I am so sorry. I am so clumsy since the accident. My depth perception is off." She looked at me with pure hatred. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the predator underneath. But she caught herself. She remembered the money. She remembered the game. "It is fine," she snapped, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. It is fine." "No, it is not fine," I insisted. "You cannot sit in wet clothes. Come upstairs with me. I have a spot remover in my dressing room that works miracles. And I can lend you something to wear." She hesitated, looking at Terrence. He nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead," he said. "Keisha has great stuff. Get cleaned up." She followed me up the stairs. I led her down the hallway past the master bedroom and into the large walk-in dressing room attached to the bath. I turned on the lights. It was a beautiful room lined with mirrors. In the corner behind a painting was the wall safe, and just as I had said, the painting was swung open and the safe door was ajar. Inside, clearly visible, was a stack of documents with blue covers. The top one read, "Deed of Trust, Commercial Property Valuation $12 million. I saw Amber's eyes dart to the safe. She licked her lips. "I will go get the stain remover from the bathroom," I said. "You just wait here. Take off the dress. I will find you a robe." I walked into the bathroom and closed the door, but I did not close it all the way. I left a crack. And I did not go for the stain remover. I pulled out my phone and opened the app connected to the hidden camera I had installed in the dressing room light fixture that morning. On my screen, I saw Amber in high definition. She did not take off her dress. She waited exactly 3 seconds after the door closed. Then she moved. She tiptoed across the room to the safe. She reached in and pulled out the documents. Her hands were shaking with excitement. She flipped through the pages, scanning the numbers. $12 million, she whispered. Holy hell. She pulled out her phone. I watched on my screen as she held the documents up and started snapping photos. She took a picture of the valuation. She took a picture of the signature page. She took a picture of the property address. Then she started typing furiously. I switched apps on my phone to the spy software monitoring Terrence's phone. A text came in from Amber. Photo attached. Look at this. It is real. $12 million for just one building. There are 3 more deeds in here. Terrence, we are going to be richer than God. Get the papers signed. Take the house. Take everything. Then kick her out. I watched the text land on Terrence's phone downstairs. A moment later, his reply came through. "Did she see you? Be careful. Put it back." Amber typed back. "She is in the bathroom being an idiot. She has no clue. I am putting it back now. Hurry up and finish this. I want this money." I watched her shove the papers back into the safe and close the door slightly, just like it was. She smoothed her hair and stepped back to the center of the room just as I flushed the toilet to signal my return. I walked back into the dressing room holding a bottle of spray. "Here we go," I said cheerfully. Amber smiled at me. It was the smile of a woman who thought she had just robbed a bank. "Thanks, Keisha," she said. "You are so sweet." I looked at her. I looked at the red stain on her chest that looked like a gunshot wound. "No, Amber," I thought. "I am not sweet. I am the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And you just signed your own confession. Those deeds in the safe were fakes. I had printed them myself using templates from the internet. The property addresses belonged to parking lots owned by the city. The valuation was made up. But she believed it, and Terrence believed it. They were now operating on false information. They thought there was a $12 million building waiting for them. They would be so blinded by the zeros that they would rush. And when people rush, they make mistakes. I helped her clean the dress. I gave her a robe. We went back downstairs. The rest of the dinner was surreal. Amber was practically vibrating with excitement. Terrence was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Jessica was drunk and sullen. When they finally left, I stood at the door and waved goodbye. "You take care now, Keisha," Amber called out from the driveway. "Get plenty of rest." "Oh, I will," I said. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned against the wood and let out a long breath. I had the photos of her stealing from my safe. I had the text messages proving the conspiracy to defraud me. I had the proof that their relationship was driven by a plot to strip me of my assets. I walked into the kitchen where the dirty dishes were piled high. I picked up Amber's wine glass. Her lipstick was still on the rim, a bright, violent shade of red. I dropped the glass into the trash can. It shattered with a satisfying crunch. Phase 1 was complete. They had taken the bait. Now it was time to reel them in. I went upstairs to the bedroom where Terrence was already in bed pretending to read a book, but I knew he was looking at the photos Amber sent him. "Did everyone have a good time?" he asked, looking up at me with those lying eyes. "I think so," I said, climbing into bed beside him. Amber certainly seemed to enjoy herself. He smirked. "Yeah, she is a lively girl." I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. "Good night, Terrence. Good night, babe." I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe. He was dreaming of millions. He was dreaming of yachts and new cars and a life without me. Enjoy the dream, Terrence, I thought, because the wake-up call is going to be brutal. Tomorrow, I would initiate the financial trap. I would let them think they were winning. I would let them think they were smart. And then I would pull the rug out from under them so hard they would never stand up again. The evidence was secured. The trap was set. Now I just needed to close the door. The next morning, I woke up with a plan that was colder than the Chicago wind rattling the window panes. While Terrence was in the shower, scrubbing off the guilt of another sleepless night, I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Banks. We had discussed this move yesterday, but today was the day we executed it. I needed to cut off Terrence's escape route. I needed to back him into a corner so tight that the only way out was through me. Mr. Banks answered on the first ring. "It is time, Arthur," I said quietly, keeping one eye on the bathroom door. "I understand, Keisha," he replied. "I have the appointment set for 10 o'clock. Mr. Banks was going to walk into the offices of Sterling Capital where Terrence worked. He was not going there as my lawyer. He was going there as the executor of my father's estate, representing Blue Harbor Logistics. He was going to offer Sterling Capital a massive investment opportunity. $5 million of liquid capital to be managed by their firm. It was the kind of commission that made senior partners drool. But there was a catch, a very specific, non-negotiable condition. We require a full forensic audit of the specific fund manager who will be handling the account, Mr. Banks would say. Since Mr. Terrence Williams is the family connection, we want him to manage the portfolio. But for due diligence, we need to see the last 12 months of his transaction history. We need to know our money is in safe hands. It was the perfect trap. Terrence was a manager at a hedge fund, but I knew from the spy app on his phone that he was not investing in safe stocks. He was gambling. He had been siphoning money from his client accounts to play the cryptocurrency market. He was betting on meme coins and risky tokens trying to get rich quick, and he was losing. He was losing big. I hung up the phone just as the water turned off. I lay back down and pulled the covers up, waiting for the show to begin. Terrence left for work in a rush. He was wearing his best suit, but he looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin had a gray pallor. He kissed me on the forehead with cold lips and told me to rest. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the audio feed from his phone. I was going to attend work with him today. I listened as he drove to the office, blasting aggressive rap music, trying to hype himself up. I heard him walk into the building. I heard the elevator ding. Then around 10:30, I heard the intercom on his desk buzz. "Williams, get in here, now!" It was his boss, Mr. Sterling. His voice was not friendly. I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. I heard Terrence walking down the hall. I could practically hear his heart rate spiking through the microphone. He entered the office. "Sit down, Williams," Mr. Sterling barked. "We just had a very interesting meeting with a Mr. Arthur Banks representing the estate of your late father-in-law." I heard Terrence inhale sharply. "Oh, really? That is great news, sir. I told my wife I would handle—" "Shut up, Williams." Mr. Sterling cut him off. "He is offering us a $5 million buy-in, but he demands an internal audit of your ledger. He wants to ensure fiscal responsibility before he signs the check." There was a silence, a long, heavy silence. "An audit, sir," Terrence stammered. "Is that really necessary? I mean, he is family. I can vouch for it is mandatory, Williams. It is a condition of the deal. The auditors are coming in on Monday morning at 9 a.m. They are going to scrub your accounts from top to bottom. Have your books ready. If there is a single penny out of place, you are fired. Do you understand?" "Monday, sir. That is very soon." "Monday, Williams. Get out." I heard the door close. I heard Terrence walking back to his office. He was breathing hard like a man who had just run a marathon. He slammed his office door shut. Then the panic set in. I heard him pacing the room. I heard him muttering to himself. "Monday. Monday. Oh God. I am dead. I am dead." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It was not Amber. It was his bookie, or maybe his crypto broker. "Yo, it is T. How much am I down?" I listened to the voice on the other end. "You are down 300 grand, T. The market crashed last night. Your positions were liquidated. You owe the platform $300,000 plus the $50 you took from the client account." Terrence let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "I need to cover it," he whispered. "I need 350 grand by Monday morning. If the auditors see the hole in the client account, I am going to prison." The voice on the other end laughed. "That sounds like a you problem, T. Good luck." The line went dead. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping herbal tea and smiling. He was $350,000 in the hole. He had embezzled money from his clients to gamble, and he lost it all. And now he had 72 hours to find the money or face felony charges. He had no liquid cash. His credit cards were maxed out. He had only one option left: me. Or rather, my father's phantom millions. I knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to come home and try to get access to my inheritance. He needed to transfer money from my supposed trust fund to cover his debts before Monday. I prepared the paperwork. I went to my father's home office, which I had kept locked. I printed out a document I had drafted with Mr. Banks days ago. It looked like a standard financial disclosure form, dense with legal jargon and fine print. But buried in the middle of page 4 was a clause that was lethal. It was a confession of judgment. It stated that Terrence acknowledged a personal debt of $500,000 to me, Keisha Williams. It stated that in order to secure this debt, he was transferring his 50% ownership of our marital home to me, effective immediately. It stated that he waived all rights to contest this transfer in court. It was a trap wrapped in a boring legal document. I put the document in a folder along with some other random papers. Then I went back to the living room and waited. Terrence came home at 3 p.m. He looked manic. He had sweat stains on his shirt even though the AC was blasting. He smelled of fear and breath mints. Keisha, baby, he called out. Where are you? I am on the couch, Terrence, I replied, making my voice sound weak and airy. He rushed into the room carrying a briefcase. He knelt beside me, grabbing my hand. His hands were shaking. Babe, listen to me. I have been on the phone with Mr. Banks all day. We are making progress, but there is a snag, a time-sensitive snag. Oh no, I whispered, touching my forehead. What is it? I cannot handle stress right now, Terrence. My head is spinning. I know, baby. I am sorry. But Mr. Banks said that in order to release the initial funds, the money we need to pay off the house and buy you that new car, we need to move fast. The courts are closing in an hour for the weekend. He pulled a stack of papers out of his briefcase. These are just standard power of attorney forms, he said. It gives me permission to talk to the bank for you. Since you are not feeling well, I can just handle the transfers. I can get the money moving so we do not have to wait months. He held out a pen. His eyes were wide, desperate. Just sign here, and I will take care of everything. I looked at the papers. It was a standard power of attorney. If I signed that he could empty my accounts, he could take loans in my name, he could use my credit to cover his theft. I hesitated. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the pen. Okay, Terrence, I said. I trust you. I brought the pen to the paper. I saw his shoulders relax. He was practically salivating. But wait, I stopped pulling the pen back. His head snapped up. What? What is it? I reached under the cushion of the sofa and pulled out my folder. Mr. Banks sent a courier over an hour ago, I said innocently. He said that because of the tax laws or something. God, I do not understand it. He said that before I can sign a power of attorney, we have to sign a spousal liability waiver. Terrence stared at the folder. A what? A liability waiver, I repeated. Mr. Banks said that since the inheritance is separate property, we have to sign a paper saying that our personal debts are separate too. He said it protects you, Terrence. He said that if the estate has any taxes owed, the government cannot come after your salary. I opened the folder and pushed my document toward him. He said we both have to sign this first, then I can sign the power of attorney. He was really specific, Terrence. He said if we do not do this step, the power of attorney is void. Terrence looked at the document. It was 5 pages long, single-spaced. He looked at his watch. It was 3:45 p.m. The banks closed at 5. He needed to get my signature, deposit the form, and initiate a transfer before the weekend. He was running out of time. He did not read it. He did not even skim it. He saw the words spousal waiver at the top, and he assumed it was just bureaucratic red tape. He assumed I was too stupid to trick him. He assumed he was the shark, and I was the minnow. Fine, whatever, he snapped, grabbing the pen from my hand. Where do I sign? Page 4, I said, pointing to the line. And page 5. He flipped the pages aggressively, tearing the paper slightly. He scribbled his signature on the line. He signed away his half of the house. He signed a confession that he owed me $500,000. He signed his own financial death warrant. There, he said, shoving the papers back at me. Done. Now sign the power of attorney, Keisha. Come on. I took the folder with his signature and placed it calmly on the coffee table. I put my hand over it, protecting it. Then I looked at the power of attorney he was holding. I took the pen. I leaned forward. Terrence watched me breathlessly. This was it. This was his salvation. With this signature, he could steal enough money to cover his embezzlement and stay out of jail. I brought the pen to the paper. I wrote in big looping cursive letters, VOID. Void. I drew a line through the entire page. Terrence stared at it. He blinked. What? What are you doing, Keisha? I looked up at him. The act was over. I let the weak, confused expression drop from my face. I straightened my spine. I looked him dead in the eye with a clarity that terrified him. I changed my mind. Terrence, I said, my voice cold and steady. He looked at me like I had grown a second head. You changed your mind. Keisha, are you crazy? We need this. I need to get to the bank. Why did you write void? Because I do not think it is a good idea for you to have access to my money, I said, standing up. He stood up too, towering over me, trying to use his size to intimidate me. Keisha, stop playing games. You're sick. You're confused. Mr. Banks said we need to do this. Mr. Banks works for me, Terrence, I said, stepping closer to him. Not you. And I know about the audit. He froze. His face went pale. What audit? The audit at Sterling Capital, the one happening on Monday morning. The one that is going to reveal that you stole $350,000 from your clients to buy Dogecoin. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. How do you know that? I tapped my ear. I hear everything, Terrence. I know about the debt. I know about the embezzlement. And I know you were trying to use my father's money to clean up your mess. He stepped back, looking at the folder on the table. The folder he had just signed. "What did I just sign, Keisha?" he whispered. I picked up the folder and smiled. "You just signed a confession, Terrence. You admitted that your gambling debts are yours alone, and since you do not have the cash to pay me back for the emotional distress you have caused, you also just signed over your half of this house to me." I walked toward the kitchen. "Get out of my house, Terrence." He lunged for me. "Give me that paper." I held up my phone. I already took a picture of it and sent it to Mr. Banks. I lied. "It is filed." "If you touch me, Terrence, if you even breathe in my direction, I will call Mr. Sterling right now and send him the screenshots of your crypto wallet. I will send him the audio of you talking to your bookie. You will not just be fired, you will be arrested tonight." He stopped. He looked at me with pure hatred, but underneath the hate was fear. Paralyzing fear. He knew I had him. "You are a bitch," he spat. "And you are homeless," I replied, "and broke, and about to be unemployed." I pointed to the door. "You have 5 minutes to pack a bag. If you are not out by the time I finish this cup of tea, I am calling the police. And Terrence..." He looked back at me, his hand on the doorknob, his eyes filled with tears of rage. "Do not take the silver SUV. The brakes are bad, remember." I took a sip of my tea. "Take the bus." He stared at me for one last second, then he turned and ran up the stairs. I heard him throwing clothes into a bag. I heard him cursing. I heard him slamming drawers. 5 minutes later, he was gone. The front door slammed shut, shaking the house. I walked to the window and watched him dragging his suitcase down the driveway in the rain. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I looked down at the document in my hand. The house was mine. The debt was his. The trap had sprung. But I was not done. He was broke and homeless, but he was still free, and Amber was still out there waiting for her payday. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Banks. "He signed it, Arthur," I said. "The house is secure. Now let's talk about Monday morning. I think the auditors might need a little help finding exactly where to look." I hung up and walked into the living room. The air smelled cleaner already. The scent of Dior Sauvage was fading. I sat down on the sofa in the house that was finally truly mine, and I prepared for the final act. The destruction was not complete yet. I wanted them to lose everything, and Monday was going to be a bloodbath. The house was quiet for the first time in years. The heavy silence of an empty home usually made me anxious, but tonight it felt like victory. Terrence was gone, his clothes were gone, his smell was fading. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the folder containing the signed confession and the deed to the house. I had won the battle, but I had a sinking feeling that the war was not over. Terrence was a cornered animal, and cornered animals bite. I heard a soft tapping on the back sliding glass door. It was rhythmic and hesitant. I froze. My first thought was that Terrence had come back to break in. I grabbed the steak knife from the counter and crept toward the back of the house, keeping to the shadows. I peered through the blinds. Standing in the pouring rain, huddled under the overhang of the roof, was a familiar figure in an oversized coat. Frank. I unlocked the door and slid it open. Frank stumbled inside, shivering uncontrollably. He looked terrified. His eyes were darting around the kitchen as if he expected Terrence to jump out of the pantry. "He is gone." "Frank," I said, locking the door behind him. I kicked him out. "You are safe here." Frank let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He reached into the deep inner pocket of his dirty coat. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped what he was holding. It was a small black leather notebook. The edges were worn and the cover was stained with coffee and oil, but it looked important. "I should have given you this days ago, Mrs. Williams," he whispered. I was scared. I thought if I held on to it, I could use it as leverage if he ever came after me again. But after what he did to your car, I realized he does not care about leverage. He just cares about erasing people. I took the book. It was heavy. "What is this, Frank?" "It is his ledger," Frank said. "He threw it in the trash bin at a gas station 6 months ago. He thought he had shredded it, but he missed a chunk. And he threw the rest away intact. I fished it out. I opened the book. It was not just a diary. It was a log of crimes. Handwritten notes detailing cash payments to city officials, dates and times of meetings with known loan sharks, and most damning of all, a list of wire transfers labeled cleaning fees, which I immediately recognized as money laundering for his crypto schemes. This proves everything I whispered, running my finger over Terrence's familiar handwriting. This proves the embezzlement. This proves the bribery. Frank, this is not just grounds for firing. This is federal prison time." Frank nodded. "That is why I brought it. You need to bury him, Mrs. Williams, before he buries you." I made Frank sit down. I made him tea. I offered him a sandwich. He ate like he hadn't seen food in 2 days. While he ate, I sat there reading the book, feeling a mix of horror and vindication. My husband was not just a bad man, he was a criminal enterprise wrapped in a cheap suit. After he finished eating, Frank stood up. "I have to go, Mrs. Williams. I have a spot at the shelter tonight. If I do not check in by 10, I lose my bed." "Frank, stay here," I insisted. "We have a guest room." "No, ma'am," he said, shaking his head. "I cannot. If he comes back and finds me here, he will kill us both. I will be safer in the crowd." I could not argue with his fear. I gave him another $100 and walked him to the back door. "Be careful, Frank," I said. I watched him walk down the driveway into the darkness. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shiny under the streetlights. I turned to go back inside. That is when I heard the screech of tires. I spun around. A car had swerved onto the curb, blocking Frank's path. It was a rental sedan, cheap and nondescript. The door flew open. Terrence stepped out. He looked unhinged. His tie was gone, his shirt was unbuttoned, and he was soaked in rain. He must have been circling the block, watching the house, waiting for a chance to sneak back in, or maybe just to stare at what he had lost. And then he saw Frank. He saw the old man who had given me the warning. He saw the man who knew his secrets. "You," Terrence roared. It was a sound of pure primal rage. "You rat! You told her! You are the reason she knows!" Frank tried to run, but he was old and tired. Terrence lunged at him with a speed I had never seen before. He tackled Frank onto the wet concrete of the driveway. "Terrence, stop!" I screamed, running out of the house. But he didn't hear me. He was blinded by fury. He began to punch Frank. He punched him in the face. He punched him in the ribs. I heard the sickening crunch of bone meeting pavement. "I am going to kill you!" Terrence screamed. "You ruined my life! You dirty old snitch!" I ran toward them, still holding the steak knife I had grabbed earlier. "Get off him, Terrence!" I yelled, brandishing the knife. "Get off him, or I swear to God I will use this." Terrence looked up. His knuckles were bloody. His eyes were wild. He looked at me, then he looked at the knife. For a second, I thought he was going to attack me too, but then the sound of a neighbor's dog barking seemed to snap him out of his trance. He realized where he was. He realized he was assaulting a homeless man on the driveway of a house he no longer owned. He scrambled backward, standing up and breathing heavily. He looked down at Frank, who was curled in a fetal position, moaning in pain. "You are next, Keisha," he spat, pointing a bloody finger at me. "You and your little spy. You think you won. This isn't over." He jumped back into his rental car and sped off, leaving tire marks on the lawn. I dropped the knife and fell to my knees beside Frank. Frank, can you hear me?" His face was a mess of blood. One of his eyes was swollen shut instantly. He was wheezing a wet rattling sound that told me his ribs were broken. "Mrs. Williams," he gasped, spitting out blood. Did you keep the book safe?" I started crying. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, Frank. The book is safe. You're going to be okay." I rode in the ambulance with him holding his hand the entire way. The paramedics worked on him, cutting off his old coat, exposing the frail body underneath. I watched the heart monitor beep erratically. I watched the pain etched on his face. At the hospital, the doctors told me the damage: 3 broken ribs, a fractured orbital socket, a collapsed lung. He was 60 years old and malnourished. A beating like that could have killed him. I stood by his bedside in the ICU, listening to the hiss of the oxygen machine. I looked at his bruised face. This man had nothing. He had no home, no family, no money. And yet he had risked his life to save mine. He had walked into the line of fire to give me the weapon I needed. And Terrence. Terrence had beaten him like a dog in the street, simply because he told the truth. Something inside me broke in that moment. Up until now, part of me just wanted to escape. Part of me just wanted to take the money, the house, and the divorce and move on. I wanted to leave Terrence in the past. I wanted to simply survive. But looking at Frank broken and battered on that hospital bed, the survivor in me died. And the Punisher was born. I was done playing defense. I was done with clever tricks and financial traps. I was done teaching lessons. I walked to the window of the ICU room and looked out at the city lights. I saw my reflection in the glass. I did not look like a nurse anymore. I looked like a soldier. "You made a mistake, Terrence," I whispered to the glass. "You should have just stolen the money. You should have just cheated. But you hurt him. You hurt an innocent old man who could not fight back." I reached into my purse and pulled out the black notebook. I felt the weight of it in my hand. It was heavy with sins. "I am not just going to divorce you, Terrence. I am not just going to bankrupt you. I am going to bury you. I am going to take this book to the FBI. I am going to hand them the recording of the break line confession. I am going to give them the photos of the embezzlement. I am going to make sure that you never breathe free air again. I am going to make sure that when you die in a cage surrounded by strangers who hate you just as much as you hate yourself." I turned back to Frank. I gently touched his hand, avoiding the IV tubes. "Rest now, Frank," I said softly, "because when you wake up, the bad man will be gone forever." I walked out of the hospital room. I did not go home. I got in my car and drove straight to the federal building downtown. It was late, but the FBI field office was always open. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. There was only cold, hard resolve. Terrence wanted a war. He wanted to use violence. He wanted to hurt the weak. Well, he was about to learn a very painful lesson. He was about to learn that there is nothing on this earth more dangerous than a woman who has lost her mercy. I walked up the steps of the federal building, clutching the black book like a Bible. "It is over, Terrence," I thought, pushing through the revolving doors. Game over. The house was silent, but my phone was screaming. It lay on the marble kitchen island, vibrating every few minutes with a new notification that lit up the dark room. I did not turn on the lights. I sat there in the shadows, watching the screen, with a glass of ice water in my hand. Transaction alert. $400. The Onyx Room. Transaction alert. $800. The Onyx Room. Transaction alert. $2,000. The Onyx Room. My husband was not just a liar and a thief, he was a fool. In the chaos of our confrontation earlier that afternoon, when he was scrambling to pack his bag, he must have managed to slide his hand into my purse. He had stolen my emergency platinum card, the one with the $50,000 limit that I kept for genuine crises. He was using it right now to fund his own destruction. I checked the spy app on my laptop. The GPS locator placed him exactly where the credit card charges were coming from. The Onyx Room was one of the most pretentious restaurants in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where they put gold leaf on the steak and charged you $50 for water. He was there with Amber. I could hear them through the microphone. The background noise was a mix of clinking silverware and low murmuring conversations, but their voices cut through it all. "Happy early birthday, baby," Terrence said. His voice was slurred. He was drunk. Amber giggled. "Oh my God, Terrence, look at this menu. Can we get the seafood tower, the one with the lobster?" "Get whatever you want," Terrence replied grandly. "We are celebrating." The old ball and chain signed the papers. The house is basically mine. Once I flip it, we are going to be sitting on a mountain of cash. I listened to him lie to her. He had signed the house over to me. He was homeless. He was broke. But his ego was so fragile he could not admit defeat to his mistress. He had to play the big man until the very last second. He was spending money he did not have on a woman who did not love him to celebrate a future that did not exist. I closed the laptop. I had heard enough. I stood up and walked up the stairs. The master bedroom felt different now that he was gone. It felt larger, cleaner. But there were still traces of him everywhere, and I needed to purge them. I grabbed a box of heavy-duty black trash bags from the closet, the kind you use for yard waste, the kind that do not rip easily. I opened his side of the walk-in closet. He had taken a suitcase worth of clothes, but he had left the rest, assuming he would be back to claim it later. He had left his winter coats, his expensive Italian shoes, his collection of silk ties. I did not fold anything. I grabbed his tailored suits by the handful, hangers and all, and shoved them into the black plastic bags. I threw in his shoes. I threw in his cologne bottles. I threw in the framed photos of him shaking hands with minor celebrities that he kept on his dresser to make himself feel important. The sound of the plastic rustling was the only noise in the room. It was a violent sound. I stripped the bed sheets where he had slept. I stripped the pillowcases. I stuffed them all into the bags until the room looked bare and sterile. I dragged the bags down the stairs one by one. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like I was dragging bodies. I piled them by the back door, ready for the sanitation trucks in the morning. He loved those suits. He defined himself by those suits. Now they were just garbage waiting for the landfill. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the table. The black ledger Frank had given me was sitting there. It was time. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the FBI field office. I had looked it up earlier. I asked to speak to the agent in charge of the Financial Crimes Division. It was late, but federal agents never truly sleep, especially when you tell the operator you have evidence of a multi-million-dollar wire fraud scheme involving a major hedge fund. 10 minutes later, I was on the line with Agent Miller. "My name is Keisha Williams," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I am the wife of Terrence Williams, a fund manager at Sterling Capital. I have in my possession a ledger detailing 3 years of embezzlement, money laundering, and bribery. I also have audio recordings of him admitting to insurance fraud and attempted murder." I heard the agent typing on the other end. "Mrs. Williams, are you in a safe location?" "I am safe," I replied. "But he is not. He is currently at the Onyx Room restaurant. He is spending stolen funds." I gave the agent everything. I gave him the address. I gave him the details of the crypto accounts from the spy app. I told him about the audit scheduled for Monday morning, but I suggested that if they waited until Monday, the money might be gone. "I am emailing you the digital files now, Agent Miller," I said. I hit send on my laptop. The progress bar moved across the screen. 10%, 50%, 100%. Sent. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams," Agent Miller said. "We will take it from here. Do not engage with him. We will have a team ready." I hung up the phone. It was done. The mechanism of justice had been activated and there was no stopping it now. My phone buzzed again. It was a text message. From hubby, I had not bothered to change the contact name yet. "Hey babe, still at the office, grinding hard for us. Just wanted to say goodnight. Working late so I might crash on the couch in the break room. Do not wait up. Love you." I stared at the screen. He was unbelievable. He was sitting in a 5-star restaurant eating lobster with his mistress, probably paying the bill with my stolen card, and he had the audacity to text me that he was working late for our future. He really thought I was that stupid. He really thought I was sitting at home pining for him, believing his lies. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. He wanted to play the loving husband one last time. Fine, I would play the loving wife. I typed out my reply slowly, savoring every letter. "Good night, baby. You work so hard. I am so proud of you. Sleep well. I hope you like the surprise I have planned for you tomorrow. It is going to be a day you will never forget." I hit send. I watched the delivery receipt turn to read. On my laptop screen through the spy camera feed, I saw him look at his phone. I saw him smirk. He showed the phone to Amber. "See?" he said to her. "She is clueless. She is planning a surprise. Probably baked me a cake or something." Amber laughed, throwing her head back. "God, she is pathetic." I closed the laptop for the final time. "Laugh while you can, Amber," I whispered to the empty room. "Eat your lobster. Drink your champagne. Because tomorrow the bill comes due, and the price is going to be higher than either of you can imagine." I turned off the kitchen lights and walked up the stairs to my empty bed. For the first time in months, I was not afraid. I was not anxious. I felt a deep, peaceful calm. The bags were packed. The police were notified. The trap was set. Tomorrow was the company anniversary party at Sterling Capital. Terrence was planning to make a speech. He was planning to announce his success. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. I slept like a baby. I slept like an innocent woman. I slept like a judge who had just signed a death warrant and knew that justice was finally served. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel was dripping in crystal and gold. It was the kind of venue where the air conditioning smelled like old money and the carpet was thick enough to bury a body in. This was the night of the Sterling Capital 25th Anniversary Gala. It was the biggest night on the Chicago financial calendar. Senators were there. Billionaires were there. And standing right in the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne he did not pay for, was my husband, Terrence. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo. He had that winning smile plastered on his face, the one that used to make my knees weak, but now just made my stomach turn. He was shaking hands with the city's elite, acting like he belonged among them. He had no idea that in less than an hour, he would be the most hated man in the room. Hanging on his arm like a trophy was Amber. She had ignored the black tie dress code completely. While the wives of the investors wore elegant black and navy gowns, Amber was wearing a dress the color of fresh blood. It was bright red, tight, and cut so low it was scandalous. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be the center of attention. She had no idea that I was about to give her exactly what she wanted. I was not in the ballroom yet. I was watching from the technical booth high above the floor. I had slipped the AV technician $500 earlier that afternoon to swap out Terrence's thumb drive. The tech didn't ask questions. He just thought it was a prank. He didn't know he was loading a lethal weapon into the projector. The lights dimmed. The chatter in the room died down. A spotlight hit the stage. Mr. Sterling, the CEO of the company, walked to the podium. He was a stern man, a man who valued loyalty above all else. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Sterling boomed, "tonight we celebrate a quarter century of excellence, and to speak on our future, I would like to invite up one of our rising stars, a man who has shown incredible ambition, Mr. Terrence Williams." The applause was polite. Terrence bounded up the stairs to the stage. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. He looked at Amber in the front row, who blew him a kiss. He looked at Jessica, his sister-in-law, sitting next to Amber, looking bored and annoyed. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Terrence said, his voice smooth. "It is an honor to stand here. When I look at this company, I see family. I see trust. I see a future where we take what is ours." He paused for dramatic effect. "I have spent the last year working on a portfolio that will revolutionize our returns. I have made sacrifices. My wife Keisha could not be here tonight because she is recovering from a personal tragedy, but she supports my vision, and tonight I want to show you exactly what that vision looks like." He pointed the clicker at the massive LED screen behind him. "Let's look at the numbers," he said confidently. He pressed the button. The screen flickered. It did not show a graph of stock returns. It did not show a pie chart. It showed the interior of a city bus. The picture was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. It was the video I had recorded on the 405. Amber's face filled the 20-foot screen. She was wearing her pink coat and oversized sunglasses. The room went silent. Terrence turned around, confused. He pressed the clicker again, trying to skip the slide, but the video kept playing. On the screen, Amber's voice boomed through the ballroom surround sound system. He messed with her car. The brakes. He said she has a long drive to the hospital today and it is raining. He said it will be quick. One sharp turn, one missed stop sign, and boom, problem solved. A collective gasp swept through the room. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out at once. Terrence froze. He stared at the giant image of his mistress confessing to a conspiracy to commit murder. He mashed the button on the clicker frantically, his face turning pale. "Turn it off," he hissed at the sound booth. "Turn it off now." But the video cut to the next clip. It was the recording from the hospital room. The screen went black, but the audio was unmistakable. It was Terrence's voice. "The doctor says she is a vegetable. $2 million tax-free plus the house plus her dad's inheritance. We hit the jackpot, baby. Mr. Sterling stood up from his table, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. He looked from the screen to Terrence, who was now sweating profusely under the stage lights. But the show was not over. The video cut again. This time it was footage from the hidden camera in my dressing room. It showed Amber opening the safe. It showed her taking photos of the fake deeds. And then the audio from Terrence's car ride that morning played over the image. It was a conversation he had with his bookie recorded by the spy app. "I am stealing from the Sterling accounts," Terrence's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Old man Sterling is a dinosaur. He doesn't check the ledger. I took 300 grand last month. I will put it back before the audit, or I will just let the company take the hit. Who cares?" On the stage, Terrence dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a screech of feedback that made everyone wince. He looked like a trapped animal. He looked at Mr. Sterling, who was now marching toward the stage with security guards flanking him. But the final knife was yet to be twisted. The video cut to one last clip. It was a recording of Terrence and Amber in the restaurant just last night. The screen showed a still photo of Jessica, his sister-in-law, and over it played Terrence's drunk voice. And Jessica, God, that woman is useless. She is just a white trash Karen who got lucky my brother married her. She is so stupid she thinks I actually like her. Once we get the money, I'm going to tell her exactly how much I hate her family. Stupid cow. The silence in the room was shattered. Jessica, who had been sitting at the front table, stood up. Her face was twisted in a rictus of pure fury. She was not a woman who handled humiliation well. She looked at the screen, then she looked at Terrence, then she looked at Amber sitting next to her. Amber was paralyzed. She was staring at the screen with her mouth open, her red dress looking less like a fashion statement and more like a target. "You bitch!" Jessica screamed. It was a primal scream. Jessica lunged. She did not just slap Amber, she tackled her. The chair flew backward. Jessica grabbed a handful of Amber's expensive hair extensions and yanked. Amber shrieked as she was dragged to the floor. "Get off me!" Amber screamed, flailing her arms. Jessica was on top of her, raining down slaps. You knew about the breaks. You helped him. And you called me what?" The ballroom erupted into chaos. Waiters dropped trays of champagne. Billionaires scrambled to get out of the way of the catfight. Security guards rushed to pull Jessica off Amber, but Jessica was fueled by the rage of a woman who had just realized her entire family was a lie. On stage, Terrence was backing away. He looked ready to vomit. He held his hands up as if to surrender. Mr. Sterling reached the stage. He grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his tuxedo and shoved him backward. "You stole from me!" Sterling roared, his voice shaking the rafters. "You stole from my clients, and you called me a dinosaur." "I can explain," Terrence stammered, tears streaming down his face. "It is deep fake. It is AI. I didn't say that." Mr. Sterling punched him. It was a clumsy old man punch, but it connected right with Terrence's jaw. Terrence stumbled back, tripping over the microphone stand and falling flat on his back. The video on the screen finally stopped looping on the image of Amber's face. It faded to black, and in white text, a single sentence appeared. "Courtesy of the wife you failed to kill." The room went dead silent again. Everyone looked at the screen, then at Terrence lying on the floor. I watched from the booth high above. I took a sip of my water. The police sirens were already wailing in the distance. I could see the flashing lights reflecting off the windows of the ballroom. Down below, Amber was sobbing, clutching her torn dress, her hair a mess. Jessica was being restrained by her husband, who looked like he wanted to kill his brother. Mr. Sterling was shouting orders to his legal team to freeze all assets immediately. And Terrence, my husband, the man who wanted to be king. He was lying on the stage alone, covering his face with his hands, trying to hide from the hundreds of eyes judging him. He had wanted the spotlight. He had wanted everyone to look at him. "Well, Terrence," I thought, standing up and smoothing my skirt, "you got your wish. They are all looking at you now." I walked out of the booth and headed toward the elevator. It was time for my entrance. The evidence had been presented. The jury of his peers had seen the truth. Now it was time for the sentencing. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors slid open. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm. I looked powerful. I looked like a woman who had just taken out the trash. I walked out into the chaos of the lobby just as the FBI agents were swarming through the front doors. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I said, pointing toward the ballroom. "The man you are looking for is on the stage, and I believe he is ready to confess." The double doors of the ballroom flew open with a force that shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. It was not the polite entrance of hotel staff or late-arriving guests. It was the synchronized invasion of federal authority. A dozen agents in blue windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI stamped across their chests poured into the room like a tidal wave. They moved with a terrifying precision that silenced the few people who were still whispering. The chaos of the fistfight between Jessica and Amber stopped instantly. The waiters froze with trays in their hands. Even Mr. Sterling stepped back, his face pale as he realized the magnitude of the storm that had just made landfall in his company. Federal agents, one of them shouted, his voice booming without a microphone, "Nobody move. Stay where you are." They did not fan out to check IDs. They knew exactly who they were coming for. They moved in a straight line toward the stage where Terrence was still scrambling to get to his feet. He looked like a rat trapped in a corner, his eyes darting from the agents to the exits to the shocked faces of his colleagues. There was nowhere to run. The stage that he had built to showcase his glory had become his cage. Terrence Williams, an agent, barked, stepping onto the platform. "You are under arrest." Terrence panicked. The reality of the situation hit him, and his narcissism kicked into overdrive. He could not accept that he had lost. He could not accept that he had been outsmarted. In his mind, he was the genius and I was the fool. So he did what he always did. He lied. He deflected. He screamed. No, you have got this wrong," Terrence yelled, backing away, until he hit the screen that was still frozen on his mistress's face. "This is a mistake. My wife did this. She is crazy. She is mentally unstable." He pointed a shaking finger at the empty technical booth above, not knowing I was already on the ground floor. "She set me up," he screamed, his voice cracking. "She is jealous. She used AI to make those videos. None of that is real. I am a victim here. Can't you see that? She is trying to ruin my reputation because I wanted a divorce." The agents did not pause. They did not care about his excuses. One of them grabbed his left arm. Another grabbed his right. They wrenched his arms behind his back with zero gentleness. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited. "I will not be silent." Terrence shrieked, struggling against the cuffs. "You need to arrest her. She hacked my accounts. She fabricated evidence. Mr. Sterling, tell them how good I am. Tell them I made you millions." Mr. Sterling turned his back on him, crossing his arms in disgusted silence. It was the perfect moment. The stage was set. The villain was in chains. But the story needed a narrator to close the chapter. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains of the service entrance. I was not wearing the hospital gown he had last seen me in. I was not wearing the modest nurse scrubs he hated. I was wearing a black tuxedo suit, tailored, sharp, expensive. It was the kind of power suit that Terrence always wanted to wear, but could never quite pull off. My hair was slicked back. My makeup was flawless. I looked like the CEO of my own life. The sound of my stilettos clicking on the hardwood floor cut through the murmurs of the crowd. The sea of people parted for me. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. They saw the woman who had just publicly executed her husband without firing a single shot. I walked straight to the stage. I did not rush. I took my time. I wanted him to see me coming. I wanted him to see that I was not broken. I was not sick. I was not the victim he thought he could bury. Terrence saw me. He stopped struggling. His mouth fell open. "Keisha," he whispered. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The FBI agents paused, letting me approach. They knew who I was. I was the informant. I was the one who had handed them the case on a silver platter. I reached down and picked up the microphone that Terrence had dropped. It was still live. I looked out at the crowd. I looked at Amber, who was being pulled to her feet by another agent, mascara running down her face, ruining her red dress. Then I turned to Terrence. "I am not crazy, Terrence," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and amplified to fill every corner of the room. He flinched at the sound of my name, and I did not hack anything. I continued. You see, gentlemen of the FBI, my husband seems to have forgotten how marriage works in the state of Illinois. We have joint assets, we have joint accounts, and as his loving wife, I simply exercised my legal right to authorize a full audit of our finances. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was the consent form I had signed days ago. I signed the warrant, Terrence. I gave them permission to tap the phone. I gave them permission to track the car. I gave them everything. Because unlike you, I have nothing to hide. Terrence stared at me. The color drained from his face completely. He realized there was no defense. There was no technicality. He had brought the enemy into his house and given her the keys. But you were in a coma, he stammered. I smiled. A cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. I was resting, I said. I needed my energy. Planning a birthday party is exhausting work. I stepped closer to him until I was inches from his face. I could smell the sweat and the fear rolling off him. It replaced the smell of his expensive cologne. You wanted a surprise, Terrence? You wanted a night you would never forget. I gestured to the agents who tightened their grip on his arms. I gestured to the ruined gala. I gestured to his weeping mistress in handcuffs. I hope you like your gift, I whispered into the microphone so everyone could hear. The handcuffs clicked. It was a final definitive sound. Happy birthday, Terrence. The agents shoved him forward. He stumbled, his head hanging low. He did not look at me again. He could not. The shame was too heavy. As they dragged him off the stage, past the horrified guests, past his furious boss, past the ruins of his life, I stood there in my black suit alone in the spotlight. Mr. Sterling walked up to the stage. He looked at me with a newfound respect. Mrs. Williams, he said quietly, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I looked at him. Neither did I, Mr. Sterling. But now we all know. I handed him the microphone. My work here was done. I walked down the stairs, my head held high. I did not look back at the man being shoved into the back of a squad car outside. He was no longer my husband. He was just a case number, and I was finally free. The days following the gala were a blur of flashing cameras and legal briefings, but for the first time in my life, I slept soundly every single night. The silence in my house was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was the peaceful silence of a sanctuary that had been cleansed. I watched the fallout from the safety of my living room sipping tea, while the world outside tore my enemies apart piece by piece. Justice was not just swift, it was absolute. Terrence never came home. He went straight from the ballroom to a holding cell and then to a federal detention center. The bail hearing was a spectacle. His lawyer, a frantic public defender, because I had frozen all our joint assets, tried to argue that Terrence was a flight risk, but not a danger to the community. That was when the prosecutor played the tape from the bus. That was when they presented the report from Mr. Henderson regarding the cut brake lines on my SUV. The judge looked at Terrence with eyes cold as ice and denied bail immediately. The charges piled up like a car wreck on the highway: wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. But the charge that broke him, the charge that wiped that arrogant smirk off his face forever, was attempted murder in the first degree. The evidence was irrefutable. The text messages I intercepted the audio of him bragging to Amber, and the physical evidence of the severed brake cable painted a picture of a cold-blooded killer. I went to his arraignment. I wanted him to see me. I sat in the front row wearing white. When the judge read out the potential sentencing, Terrence collapsed. He literally fell to his knees in his orange jumpsuit, sobbing like a child. He was facing 20 years. 20 years in a federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 18. He would go in as a 38-year-old man who thought he was a king, and he would come out an old, broken nobody. He had traded his Italian suits for state-issued cotton. He had traded his corner office for a 6x8 cell. And the irony was, he did it all for money that he never even got to touch. But Terrence was not the only one who fell. The destruction of Amber was perhaps even more satisfying because it happened in the court of public opinion. Amber was not charged criminally, as the conspiracy charges were harder to stick without her direct physical involvement in the tampering, but her life as she knew it was over. The video of her on the bus, the one where she laughed about my death and planned to burn my mattress, went viral within hours. It was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. The internet did what the internet does best. They found her. The backlash was nuclear. The hashtag evil mistress trended for 3 days straight. Thousands of people flooded her social media accounts with comments. They called her a monster. They called her a home wrecker. They dug up her old tweets. They found out where she lived. She had to delete every single social media profile she had, which for an influencer is a death sentence. But it got worse for her. The fashion brands she had contracts with dropped her instantly. No company wanted their clothes worn by the woman who laughed about killing a wife. She was sued for breach of contract. She lost her apartment because she could no longer pay the rent without Terrence's stolen money. A few weeks later, a friend of mine sent me a photo. It was taken at a dingy diner on the south side of the city. There was Amber wearing a stained blue uniform, pouring coffee for a truck driver. She looked tired. Her extensions were gone. Her makeup was cheap. She looked miserable. She was working double shifts just to pay off the lawsuits and the debts she had racked up trying to live a lifestyle she couldn't afford. She was back to being a nobody serving tables, and every time she looked at a customer, she had to wonder if they recognized her as the most hated woman in Chicago. Then there was Jessica. Poor hateful Jessica. She thought she was safe because she was just a bystander, but she underestimated the blast radius of her brother-in-law's crimes. Jessica's husband, Michael, was Terrence's younger brother. Michael was a decent man, a quiet man who worked hard and loved his kids. He had always been blind to Jessica's cruelty, but the gala opened his eyes. He saw his wife attacking another woman on the floor of a black tie event. He saw the video where Terrence called her a useful idiot and a white trash Karen. And he realized that Jessica had known about the affair. She had encouraged it. She had mocked me at my father's funeral. Michael came to see me a week after the arrest. He stood on my porch looking ashamed. "I am sorry, Keisha," he said, his voice cracking. "I did not know. I swear to God I did not know how bad it was. I believed him." "What about Jessica?" I asked. Michael looked down at his shoes. "I filed for divorce this morning. I cannot have that energy around my children. I cannot look at her without seeing her laughing at you while you were grieving. She is moving back in with her parents in Wisconsin. Jessica lost her marriage. She lost her status in the family. She lost her home. She was shipped back to the small town she came from, branded as the woman who cheered on a murderer. She called me once, begging me to talk to Michael to tell him to take her back. I hung up on her. I did not have space in my life for sympathy. The fallout was complete. The house of cards they had built on lies and greed had collapsed, and they were all buried under the rubble. Terrence was in a cage. Amber was in an apron. Jessica was in exile. And me. I was standing in the middle of my kitchen watching the sun come up over the garden. The air smelled fresh. The coffee tasted better. I had survived the plot to kill me. I had survived the betrayal. I had survived the heartbreak. I picked up the black ledger that Frank had given me. I walked over to the fireplace. I did not need it anymore. The FBI had their copies. The original was just a painful memory. I tossed it into the flames. I watched the pages curl and turn to ash. I watched the record of Terrence's sins disappear into smoke. It was done. The chapter was closed. But my story was far from over. I had a fortune to manage. I had a life to live. And most importantly, I had a promise to keep. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. A brand new car was sitting there. A safe car. I grabbed my keys. I had a meeting with Mr. Banks. We had $15 million to invest, and I had a very specific idea of where to start. The fallout was over. The rise of Keisha Williams was just beginning. The weeks following the sentencing were a whirlwind of paperwork and liquidation sales. But when the dust finally settled, I was left holding a check for nearly $600,000. This was the sum total of Terrence's life. It was the proceeds from the sale of his sports car, his designer watches, his share of our home, and the seized assets from his secret accounts. Everyone told me to take the money and run. My friends told me to book a first-class ticket to the Maldives. My accountant told me to invest it in the stock market. But every time I looked at that check, I felt sick. That money was not a blessing. It was blood money. It was accumulated through lies, manipulation, and the suffering of others. I did not want a single dime of it. I wanted to wash my hands clean of Terrence Williams forever. So I did something that would have made Terrence roll over in his prison bunk. I took every cent of his assets and I started the Mitchell Legal Defense Fund. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing high-powered legal representation for women trapped in abusive marriages who cannot afford to fight back. I hired the toughest divorce lawyers in Chicago, the ones who usually charge $500 an hour, and I put them on retainer for women who have nothing. The irony is delicious. The money Terrence stole to destroy a woman is now being used to save them. Every time a woman wins custody of her children or secures a restraining order against a violent husband, it is funded by the man who tried to kill me. It is the perfect circle of justice. But my most important investment was not in a foundation. It was in a person. On the day Frank was discharged from the hospital, I was waiting at the curb in my new sedan. He walked out slowly, leaning on a cane, his face still healing from the bruises. He looked at me with those sad, wise eyes and asked if I could drop him off at the homeless shelter downtown. I told him to get in the car and stop asking questions. I drove him to a quiet, tree-lined street in a safe neighborhood near the park. We stopped in front of a small brick apartment building with flower boxes in the windows. I handed him a set of keys. Frank looked at the keys and then at me. He was confused. I told him that this was his home. I had paid the lease for 5 years in advance. It was not charity, it was a salary advance. He looked even more confused until I handed him an employment contract. My father's logistics company, Blue Harbor, needed a new fleet manager. We needed someone honest, someone who knew cars inside and out, someone who understood loyalty. When Frank realized what I was offering him, he broke down. The man who had been beaten and discarded by my husband was now in charge of 100 trucks and a team of 40 drivers. He wears a suit to work now. He has his dignity back. And every time I see him at the company headquarters, he stands a little taller. He is not just an employee, he is family. Yesterday evening, I drove back to the cemetery. It was not raining this time. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple as the sun began to set behind the city skyline. I walked up the hill to my father's grave. The grass was green and lush. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the wind in the trees. I felt light. The heavy burden of fear that I had carried for so long was finally gone. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was the official notification from the Department of Corrections. It listed Terrence's inmate number and his facility assignment. I knelt down and placed the paper on the soft earth right next to the headstone. "I did it, Daddy," I whispered. "The company is safe. The money is safe. And I am safe. You were right about him. You were right about everything. But I handled it. I handled it like a Mitchell." I stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon, feeling a profound sense of peace. My father was resting easy now. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a name that made me smile. Dr. David Evans. He was the trauma surgeon who had helped me stage my death. He was the one who stood by me when I was terrified. He was the only man besides my father and Frank who had never lied to me. I slid my finger across the screen to answer. "Hello, David," I said. His voice was warm and a little nervous. He asked me if I was busy. He said he found a new coffee shop near the lake that served the best dark roast in the city. He asked if I wanted to join him. I paused, looking at the open road ahead of me. For years, my life had been dictated by a man who wanted to control my every move. But now the road was wide open. The steering wheel was in my hands. "I would love that, David," I said. "I will see you in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. It tasted like freedom. I got into my car and started the engine. I checked my mirrors. There was no one following me. There was no one tracking me. There was just me, Keisha Williams, driving toward a future that was finally mine to write. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the highway. The city lights were twinkling ahead of me, promising a new beginning. I was alive. I was wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with money. And I was free. This is Keisha Williams signing off. Trust your gut, fight for your life, and never let them see you coming.